DuraClean specializes in carpets and upholstery, grout, and tile cleaning. Their patented cleaning technique transforms worn-out furniture, fabrics, and moldy bathrooms, and is perfect for those with allergies. We provide services in fire and smoke damage, flooding, mold elimination, contracts, janitorial, and office cleaning. For more information, visit DuraCleanBermuda.bm or call 337-5032 or 234-1799. There's a difference in cleaning, a DuraClean difference.
On any given week, Bermudians by the thousands file into this building to appear in civil court on a slew of cases stemming from unpaid bills as a direct result of unemployment in Bermuda. In fact, millions of dollars owed in unpaid hospital bills account for 60% of the caseload being dealt with here in Bermuda Civil Court.
The ones we see on a regular basis would be the hospital bills, and then I guess next in line would be rent arrears, and then utilities. You'd be surprised how many people owe for cell phone bills. But let's talk about the hospital. Persons are unemployed, therefore they have no insurance. They go to the hospital, and obviously they're going to get some hospital coverage. The problem is, though, that after they've received the hospital attention, they got to pay this bill, and are simply unable to do so. And so about 60% of the matters I see in my court on a daily basis are related to hospital bills. In some cases they are exorbitantly high, and to a point where it's extremely difficult for a person to pay that bill. And statutorily, we run an interest rate of 7% per annum. So until such time before debt is paid, 7% interest is attached onto it. Persons, one thing about health, you can't determine when it's going to happen. People get sick, people break legs, people get medically unfit through no fault of their own. Many times it just happens. They need medical attention. What do? We've had situations, many situations in fact, where persons have refused to go to the hospital, and so they will languish at their house or wherever, sick, because they don't want to have a huge medical bill. We have persons who have come in for medical bills and don't want to go back to the hospital because they don't want to have any skyrocketing of their bills. And so I think it's a social problem that we need to arrest very soon. I tend not to be very harsh with persons who owe hospital bills, because I do understand that these things can happen out of the blue and people need attention. It's just that there's cost attached to it, which can be prohibitive for most of the people who I see.
In one case in particular, an elderly gentleman who has been ill, obviously still ill, appeared and said he's still not working and unable to work. His bills were in excess of $22,000. Now, ultimately, if he's still ill, the likelihood of that bill being written off is not going to happen. So what happens there? You advised him to come back every 3 months to keep abreast, but this could go on ultimately forever.
And we have many persons like that who will come back every 3 months, every 6 months, just to review the situation. But the reality of it is that they probably never will pay off that bill, particularly if they're over 65, because their likelihood of working is low, their pension is extremely low. I mean, you speak of the workers who make $200 a week. I've seen less than that. I've seen some hotel workers who have actually showed me physical checks, which are less than $100 per week. How can one survive on that? And if you're 65, it just compounds the problem. And so we're sensitive to that, we're sympathetic to that, and my view is I think justice has to sort of balance out these things. I mean, the hospital has resources where they probably can pay their bills. But if you're 65 and you have $10,000 worth of bills and you cannot work, want to work, cannot work, what do we do? We're going to be very slow to lock that person up. very slow.
But the social ramifications, the stress on the family, the impact on the children, it must be taking a heavy toll on this community in that area.
I have not seen as many distraught people before that I see now. People are genuinely. There was a time I might have seen a few crocodile tears, but people are genuinely distraught and depressed. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would venture to say that many people come to my court probably would be, and I'm trying to be dramatic about this, but people who actually probably would be diagnosed with clinical depression. It is that serious. And when you have persons who can't pay their bills, are unable to work, can't look after the children that they would like to, or they have to tell their teenage child that you can't go to university, and on top of that you have court. It is quite a depressing situation. And like I said, people would come to my court sometimes and literally break down and cry. Because of course coming to court is sort of like an indication that if you've reached the court, it's the last resort. It is an indication that you have, for some people, failed. The reality is, though, that these people have not really failed. They had been victims of circumstances and find themselves in the court.
Now, one of the issues I know you're passionate about is this whole issue of regulations for Bermuda's debt collectors. You have statutory interest, but there's nothing in law that says how much more they can tack onto a bill once you end up in the debt collection agency. Some people can have a $400 unpaid cell phone bill that goes to the collectors. By the time it gets to your court, it's $1,200. What's your view on that? It was promised, regulations were promised. It hasn't happened. What do you think about that whole issue?
Right. It's gotten better. It's still obviously not where we want it to be. There may still be some predatory debt collectors out there. I know there are some, however, who are actually quite good and quite sympathetic. In fact, the lawyer's firm that deals a lot with the Bermuda Hospitals Board matters, I think is quite reasonable and lenient and respectful of some of the debts. But there are other debt collection agencies or debt collection persons who I think flout, I can't even say rules because there aren't any. But certainly take advantage of those who are vulnerable, those who actually owe money. So I would love to see, and I know the Chief Justice also would love to see, the regulations in place so that debt collections can be reined in terms of their practices. I've seen circumstances where there's been a 75% increase in the debt, which is absolutely horrendous. The Supreme Court has recently laid down a law that anything more than 33% is exorbitant, and so we have not seen a lot of that, but there's still little bits hanging around. But not just sort of the interest applied, but also at what point in time persons should be sued. And I've always had a problem with persons' credit being affected by the fact that they owe electricity bills. Because it definitely stifles a person's ability to get capital, which they can pay off some of the bills that they have. So I like to see a raft of regulations put in place to, I mean, there are regulations, I'm regulated by law and by statute, and there's no reason why that should not be done for debt collection agencies.
And finally, the Chief Justice was in the news recently about this whole debate as to whether or not we still send people to jail for unpaid debt. For the record, what's the bottom line? Because were it not for you personally being the barrier, by law, people can still end up in jail for unpaid debt, correct? So to the layman, do we put people in jail for debts? Is it a law? What's the deal?
There certainly still is on the books the power for a magistrate to incarcerate somebody for debt. Has that been acting in practice? No. I was preside over the vast majority of cases, and I cannot tell you the last time I've actually incarcerated someone for debt. I think it should still remain on the books. However, I would like to see other measures that we can use at our disposal to get people to pay the debts. For example, maybe remove a passport, having the power to take someone's passport away, to restrict their ability to travel, maybe seizing some assets for temporary periods of time. I have a difficulty with taking people's licenses, because that creates another problem. Because if you take someone's license from them, then they can't drive, and therefore how can they work to pay that? I think we need to think very hard about other alternatives, still leaving incarceration as an absolute last resort. We have alternatives to incarceration in the criminal arena. I think we can have alternatives to incarceration in the civil debt arena as well. For many people, though, the threat of being sent to prison is what gets them to pay. So I think it works on occasion. I think as judges, we need to look at certainly other ways, and we need to be given other powers that we can utilize to get persons to pay debts, and only out of the last resort, in exceptional circumstances, would we incarcerate people. Now I will say this. There was a time when persons were being incarcerated for debt, but certainly since I've been a magistrate, it's something which sort of rubbed me the wrong way, and I implemented, at least in my court, a means by which persons can pay. The other thing is this: if you have a legitimate, the court can only lock someone up if they don't have the ability to pay, and we're satisfied that they have not willfully neglected to pay. At this point in time, the vast majority of people are unable to pay, and they want to pay. So it's not like they're being neglected or being willfully neglectful. So in those circumstances, and the vast majority of cases come before me, they fall into that category, that they are not being willfully neglectful. And so I don't lock them up. I always will let them know that there is the provision that they could be incarcerated, just to sort of let them know the severity and seriousness of it. The other thing is this: we're not locking people up for earning money. The persons are being sort of incarcerated because they have not abided by a court order. So what I often tell people, if they're unable to pay, if they write a letter to the court and write a letter to the creditor, then that will give me some indication that they're not trying to avoid the bill. That's enough for me. Because if you can't pay, you can't pay. You cannot squeeze blood out of a stone. But at least let the court know that you're not willfully neglecting to pay. And you can do that by calling the court or writing a letter. And that would resolve a lot of issues.